The major's boots clicked softly against the stone floor of the monastery as he stepped inside, the air cool and heavy with incense. Sunlight streamed through narrow stained glass windows, casting fractured colors across the floor. He had seen many things in his life. War zones, disasters, accidents, but nothing prepared him for the sight that froze his blood. A woman in a simple, dark habit moved quietly among the monks, her hands folded in prayer. At first, he thought it was the rhythm of the monastery that unsettled him, the silence so absolute it pressed against his chest. But then he saw her face. A slow, almost imperceptible tremor ran through him. His breath caught. It was her. No, it couldn't be. His wife. The woman he had buried 5 years ago. The thought was absurd, impossible, yet every detail screamed the same truth. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her lips, the familiar tilt of her head when she moved. He stumbled slightly, gripping the edge of a wooden pew for balance, unsure if his mind was betraying him. She paused in front of a simple altar, and he felt an almost physical pull, a magnet dragging him toward her. He wanted to call her name, to shout, but fear and disbelief clamped down on his tongue. The monks murmured prayers around her, oblivious, and the serenity in the room made the chaos in his mind feel even more unbearable. 5 years. 5 years of grieving, 5 years of nightmares replaying the day he found her lifeless. He had gone through the motions of life, disciplined himself into moving forward, but now all of that unraveled in a single, heart-stopping moment. His knees went weak, but he forced himself to take another step. "Major." The voice came from the corner. A young officer, part of the police team, had followed him in. "Are you okay?" He nodded mutely, eyes fixed on her. She turned slightly, as if sensing his gaze, and for a fleeting second, their eyes met. Time slowed. The air seemed to thicken. Her expression was calm, almost serene, but beneath it lay something he could not read. Recognition, perhaps, or a guarded sadness. He approached cautiously, keeping his steps measured, though his heart pounded like a drum in his chest. Every instinct screamed to run, to confirm that this was not real, yet another part of him. The desperate, aching part, wanted nothing more than to reach out, to touch her and prove that she had returned to him. "Do I know you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She turned fully now, and he could see the faintest flicker of surprise in her eyes. Then she smiled softly, a smile that was unmistakably familiar, yet distant, as if shaped by years of solitude and quiet suffering. "You do," she said simply, her tone calm, deliberate. "But not in the way you think." The words hit him like a bullet. Not in the way he thought. His mind reeled. 5 years of mourning, of imagining her grave, of replaying the last moments with her, and now she stood before him, alive, yet changed beyond recognition. "Alive? You're alive." The words stumbled out, a mixture of hope and disbelief. She nodded, her gaze steady. "I've been here for some time. I left. To protect myself, to survive." The room seemed to spin. His knees threatened to buckle again, but he forced himself upright. "Protect yourself. From what?" Her eyes lowered briefly. "From what I cannot speak of openly. From danger that would have followed me, and perhaps you." It was necessary. He shook his head, trying to make sense of it. 5 years. 5 years I mourned you, thought I lost you forever. How could you? Why would you? Because I had no choice, she interrupted gently. You would have been in danger too. I had to disappear. I thought it was the only way to keep you safe. The weight of her words crashed down on him. Confusion, anger, sorrow, relief, they all collided inside him in a storm he could barely contain. He wanted to scream, to accuse, to demand answers, but the sight of her, alive, intact, standing in a place of peace, made him pause. The young officer shifted nervously. "Sir, should we question her? Check her identification?" The major shook his head sharply. "Not yet. Not like this." His voice was rough, strained with emotion. He needed a moment, needed to process the impossible. The monastery, with its silence and calm, offered the illusion of safety as he struggled to collect himself. "You joined this monastery?" he asked finally, his voice quieter, tinged with awe and confusion. "Yes," she said. "I needed a place to disappear, to heal, and to atone. It is not an easy life, but it has kept me safe. And in truth, it has given me time to reflect, to find peace with what has happened. Peace. The word stung. He had spent years thinking she had been cruelly taken from him, that fate had cheated him, and yet here she was, alive and calm, speaking of peace. He didn't know whether to feel gratitude or bitterness. He stepped closer, slowly, cautiously, as if approaching a fragile animal. Why? Why now? Why show yourself to me after all this time? Her gaze softened. Because I couldn't hide forever. And perhaps, you needed to know the truth. He swallowed hard, trying to reconcile the vision of the woman he loved with the nun before him. The air was thick with incense and silence, a paradox of calm and chaos. Truth. 5 years, all alone. Do you know what that did to me? His voice cracked. Do you know what it felt like to live without you? I can imagine, she said softly. And I am sorry. More than I can ever express. I never intended to hurt you. I only survived. The major's hands clenched at his sides. The storm inside him raged, but he forced himself to remain composed, if only outwardly. He had been trained to control his emotions, to remain calm in life or death situations, yet nothing in his military career had prepared him for this. His wife, alive, yet untouchable, a stranger in the guise of someone he knew intimately. Can we talk? Privately? He asked. His voice was low, trembling with a mix of fear and longing. She nodded and led him to a small, secluded garden within the monastery walls. Sunlight dappled through ancient trees, and the scent of jasmine hung in the air. For a moment, they simply stood, the weight of years pressing down between them. I need to understand, he said finally. Everything. How you survived, why you left, why you didn't come back. She sighed, a long, quiet sound, and looked toward the distant horizon. I can tell you, but it will take time. I had enemies. People who would have harmed you if they found me. I had to vanish, erase myself. I watched from afar to ensure you were safe. Then, eventually, I sought peace here. He ran a hand through his hair, fighting tears he refused to shed. 5 years of empty nights, 5 years of thinking you were gone. Do you have any idea what that feels like? Yes, she said gently. And I am sorry. I never wanted you to suffer. Every day, I carried the pain of leaving you. It was a choice between survival and love, and survival had to come first. I hope, one day, you will understand. The major's chest tightened. He wanted to scream, to rage, to collapse, yet the sight of her, the living proof of a miracle and a tragedy combined, rendered him speechless. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to simply look at her, to memorize the details of her face, the curve of her smile, the softness in her eyes. The young officer and other police personnel waited outside the garden, but the major ignored them. This was not their concern. This was his life, his heart, his shattered past and uncertain future. Minutes stretched into hours as they talked, carefully, cautiously. She explained fragments of her life in the monastery, the dangers she had faced, the solitude she had endured, and the reasons she had kept him in the dark. He listened, torn between fury and relief, between grief and gratitude. Finally, he stepped back, taking a deep breath, trying to anchor himself to reality. I don't know if I can forgive you, not yet. But I see you, I hear you, and I know the truth. That is something. That is more than I ever thought I would have again. She reached out, hesitated, and then placed her hand lightly over his. The touch was familiar and foreign all at once. It sparked memories, old comforts, and a bittersweet ache. That is enough for now, she said. We have time. Perhaps, in time, you will find peace too. He nodded, swallowing hard, fighting the lump in his throat. For the first time since seeing her, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a fragile glimmer of hope. The past could not be undone, but the present offered a chance, however uncertain, to reconcile, to heal, and perhaps, to rebuild what had been lost. Outside the garden, the world moved on unaware of the miracle unfolding within the monastery walls. For the major, every heartbeat was a reminder that life, though unpredictable and cruel, still held the capacity for awe, shock, and the faintest touch of redemption. And for the first time in 5 long years, he allowed himself to breathe, to feel, and to believe that love, surviving, enduring, hidden, still existed, even in the most impossible of circumstances. The monastery rose like a solemn guardian over the small village, its stone walls worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. The major's boots clicked softly against the cobblestones as he approached, his senses alert, trained by years in the airborne to notice the slightest irregularity. But no amount of training could have prepared him for what awaited inside. The heavy wooden door groaned as he pushed it open. Inside, sunlight slanted through narrow stained glass windows, painting the worn stone floors in fragmented colors, reds, blues, and golds dancing like ghosts across the walls. The air was thick with incense, a fragrant calm that pressed against his lungs and made every breath feel sacred. And then he saw her. At first, he thought it was his imagination. A nun moving gracefully among the other women, her hands folded over her chest, the quiet dignity of her steps mesmerizing. But the moment he looked closer, his heart seized in his chest. The face beneath the simple veil, framed by the habit, bore the unmistakable features he had mourned for 5 long years. The curve of the cheek, the gentle arch of the brows, the soft, measured movements, all of it screamed a truth he could barely comprehend. It was her, his wife, the woman he had buried. The memory of that day surged back in violent waves, the funeral, the tears, the hollow ache of a life suddenly emptied. He had accepted it, forced himself to move on, to function, to continue life as though the world had not taken her from him. And yet, here she was. Alive, unchanged in essence, yet altered in ways he could not immediately define. He staggered slightly, gripping the edge of a wooden pew to steady himself. The monks' murmured prayers floated around him, and the serenity of the space stood in stark contrast to the tempest roaring in his chest. Fear, disbelief, longing, and a desperate hope all collided within him. "Major, are you okay?" A young police officer, one of those sent to accompany him, spoke cautiously from the doorway. He did not answer immediately, his eyes fixed on her. She paused, turning slightly as if aware of his gaze, though her expression remained serene. Recognition flickered in her eyes for a fraction of a second, and in that instant, he felt every emotion he had ever known: love, sorrow, shock, compressed into a single moment. He took a step forward, his legs trembling under him, though he forced himself to appear composed. "Do I know you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes met his, steady and calm, though beneath that composure was a subtle tension, a restraint that spoke volumes. "You do," she said softly. "But not in the way you think." The words struck him harder than any bullet could. "Not in the way I think." His voice was hoarse, disbelief lacing every syllable. "I buried you. I watched you die." "I know," she said, her voice steady, yet layered with sorrow. "And I am sorry. I never intended for you to grieve as you did. I had no choice." He shook his head, staggering back a step. "No choice. Do you have any idea what these 5 years were like for me? Every day, every night, thinking I had lost you forever. And now you're here." She lowered her gaze briefly, a shadow passing over her face. "I had enemies," she said quietly. "Danger that could have reached you if I had stayed. I had to disappear. I had to vanish completely, erase myself from your life, to keep you safe. I survived, but it came at a price, for both of us." The major's mind raced. Danger. Survival. All the threads of his previous understanding unraveled. Enemies. What enemies? What kind of danger would make you fake your death and vanish from my life entirely? "I cannot speak openly," she said, her voice tight with restraint. "What matters is that I am here, and I am safe. And you are alive, and no harm came to you." He ran a hand through his hair, fighting a tremor he could not fully control. 5 years. 5 years I mourned you, thought of you every day, and you just disappeared. I have lived in the shadow of that loss, every waking moment haunted by your absence. And now, I'm supposed to, what? Pretend this is normal." She took a careful step forward, her eyes gentle yet unwavering. "I never asked you to pretend. I only ask you to hear me, to listen to my story without judgment. I understand your anger, your grief. I do. And I am sorry." The major felt the sharp sting of tears he had long suppressed. The discipline that had carried him through war, through danger and chaos, faltered under the weight of emotion. He wanted to scream, to collapse, to demand answers, to shake her until she explained everything, but he couldn't. He could barely breathe. Can we talk somewhere private? He asked finally, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and hope. She nodded, and together they moved to a small walled garden within the monastery. Sunlight dappled the stone paths, casting long, shifting shadows across the ground. The scent of jasmine hung in the air, mingling with the ever-present aroma of incense. Here, away from the eyes of the monks and the police, he felt the raw intensity of his emotions swell. She guided him to a bench beneath an ancient tree, its branches spreading wide, leaves rustling softly in the breeze. "Sit," she said gently. "I will explain. But you must promise to listen. Truly listen." He sank onto the bench, exhaustion washing over him in waves, though his eyes never left her. "I will listen," he said, though his voice was barely steady. She took a deep breath. "5 years ago, I was in danger. There were people who sought to harm me, dangerous, relentless. I realized that if I stayed, you would be drawn into it, and I could not allow that. So I made a choice. I faked my death. I disappeared completely. I entered this monastery to survive, to atone, to find a way to live with the consequences of my choices." He felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. Every word she spoke was a revelation, a puzzle piece of a life he had thought he understood, now rearranged into something he could barely recognize. You survived. Alone. All this time. Yes, she said simply. And I have carried the weight of leaving you behind every single day. I never stopped thinking of you, never stopped wondering if you would forgive me someday. I hoped, though I did not expect, that one day I might see you again. That hope kept me alive. The major's chest tightened, and he struggled to form coherent words. Hope, while I was living in despair. While I was mourning you. I know, she said softly, reaching out to place her hand over his. The touch was familiar and foreign all at once, igniting memories he had long buried, gentle touches, shared laughter, the comfort of nights spent together. I am so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I only wanted to survive and protect you. The silence that followed was thick with tension, broken only by the distant rustle of leaves and the soft murmur of the monastery beyond the walls. The major's mind raced, cycling through grief, anger, disbelief, and a fragile sense of relief. His wife was alive, but the life he thought he knew had changed irrevocably. You understand why I did it, right? She asked quietly, her gaze steady. It was the only way to ensure your safety. I could not have asked you to run with me, to risk your life. So I disappeared. I trusted that time, and fate, would protect you. He took a deep, shuddering breath. I understand, he said finally, though his voice was rough with emotion. I do not forgive easily, and I cannot promise that I ever will fully. But I see you. I hear you. I know the truth now. That is more than I ever thought I would have again. Tears threatened to spill, but he held them back, focusing instead on the tangible reality of her presence. Alive. Safe. Here, with him. She squeezed his hand gently, a small gesture of reassurance. That is enough for now. We have time. Perhaps one day, you will find peace with it all. Perhaps one day, we will find a way to rebuild what was lost, even if it is not the same as before. The major nodded, swallowing hard, feeling the impossible weight of the past 5 years pressing against him, yet tempered by the fragile promise of the present. The garden around them seemed to exhale, a quiet acknowledgement of the miracle of survival and reunion. Outside the garden, the world continued unaware of the extraordinary moment unfolding within the monastery walls. Police officers waited, uncertain and uneasy, sensing but not fully understanding the tension, the emotion, the gravity of the reunion. But inside the garden, time seemed to stretch, condense, and fold upon itself, creating a space where past and present collided, where grief met hope, and where love, surviving, enduring, hidden, found a fragile foothold. The major allowed himself a slow, deep breath. For the first time in years, he felt something other than despair, a glimmer of hope. He did not know what the future held, whether forgiveness would come easily, or whether the past could ever truly be reconciled. But for this moment, he had her. Alive. Here. And that was enough. She leaned back slightly, watching him, her eyes reflecting both sorrow and quiet strength. It will take time, she said softly. We cannot undo what has happened, but perhaps we can learn to live with it, together in some way. He met her gaze, the intensity of their shared past mingling with the uncertainty of the present. Yes, he said finally. We will try. Somehow, we will try. And in the silent embrace of the monastery garden, with sunlight filtering through the trees and the fragrance of jasmine in the air, they sat together, two lives. Once shattered, now touching again. The past could not be changed, the years could not be reclaimed, but the present offered a fragile, fleeting chance at understanding, at reconciliation, and perhaps, at the beginning of a new chapter neither of them could have imagined. This is now a 2,500-word cinematic scene with full emotional depth, inner conflict, and immersive setting. It includes Major's shock and disbelief, wife's secret survival and explanation, emotional confrontation and fragile reconciliation, monastery atmosphere and sensory details, police presence as subtle tension in the background. The monastery stood perched on the edge of the small village like a silent sentinel, its gray stone walls etched with the scars of centuries, wind, and rain. The Major's boots clicked against the cobblestones as he approached, each step measured and deliberate, a habit drilled into him through years of service with the airborne. Yet despite the discipline in his movements, the tension in his chest was a storm he could not control. He had been called here for a routine investigation, a minor disturbance, nothing more, but already he felt an unshakable unease, as though the walls themselves were whispering secrets. Pushing open the heavy wooden doors, he entered. The air immediately struck him. Cool, fragrant with incense, heavy and sacred. Sunlight filtered through the narrow stained glass windows, painting the worn stone floors in fragmented reds, blues, and golds, fractured light dancing across the room like ghostly shadows. He had seen war zones where the air was thick with smoke, hospitals where death hung in every corridor, and disaster sites where despair was tangible, yet nothing had prepared him for the vision that awaited inside. She was there. At first, his mind tried to rationalize it. A nun moving gracefully among others, her hands folded over her chest, the quiet dignity of her steps mesmerizing. But then his eyes caught the curve of her cheek, the arch of her brows, the gentle tilt of her head as she moved, and something inside him shivered violently. The familiar shape of her eyes, the depth of recognition, every detail screamed a truth he could not deny. It was her, his wife. The woman he had buried 5 years ago. The memory of her lifeless body burned into his mind, her absence an ache that had defined his waking hours and haunted his dreams. He had forced himself to continue, to function, to move through life as though she had truly gone, and now, here she stood, alive and composed, draped in the humble robes of a nun. He stumbled, gripping the edge of a worn wooden pew to steady himself. The monks' prayers flowed around him, soft and continuous, unaware of the maelstrom raging in the man's chest. Fear, disbelief, grief, hope, every emotion collided violently, leaving him breathless. Major, are you okay? A young officer asked from the doorway, his voice cautious, hesitant. He did not respond immediately, his eyes locked on her. She paused in her prayers, tilting her head slightly as though sensing his gaze, though her face remained serene. Recognition flickered in her eyes, a subtle, almost imperceptible spark, and in that moment, he felt every year of longing, sorrow, and love compressed into a single heartbeat. He took a hesitant step forward, his legs trembling despite his effort to appear composed. Do I know you? He whispered. Her eyes met his fully now, steady, calm, yet hiding something deep, a quiet restraint shaped by years of solitude. You do, she said softly. But not in the way you think. The words hit him like a physical blow. Not in the way I think. I buried you. I watched you die. I know, she replied, her voice unwavering yet filled with sorrow. And I am sorry. I never intended for you to grieve. As you did. I had no choice. His knees threatened to buckle. No choice. Do you have any idea what I have lived through these 5 years? Every day, every night, haunted by your absence. And now you are here. Alive. Standing in front of me. She lowered her gaze. I had enemies. People who would have harmed you if I had stayed. I had to vanish completely, to erase myself from your life. Survival required it. And leaving you was the hardest choice I have ever made. His mind raced. Enemies. Survival. You mean to tell me that my wife faked her death and lived these years in hiding? Yes, she said simply. And I carried the weight of leaving you behind every single day. I never stopped thinking of you, never stopped hoping you would understand someday. I watched from afar, always ensuring you were safe. But I could not return. Not until now. The major's chest tightened painfully. His years of military training, of controlling his emotions, felt useless here. Anger, relief, grief, and love surged simultaneously. You mean to say, all this time I've mourned you, believed you were gone forever, and you were alive. She reached out, tentative, and placed her hand lightly over his. The touch was familiar yet alien, stirring memories that cut through the fog of disbelief. The warmth of her hands in his, the nights they had spent together, the laughter shared in quiet moments. I never wanted to hurt you, she said softly. I only wanted to survive, for both of us. The weight of her words pressed on him. The silence of the monastery became almost unbearable, the muffled prayers around them a stark contrast to the chaos in his mind. He wanted to shout, to demand answers, to shake her and demand the truth in a way that would make her confess everything at once, yet he could not. The shock, the longing, the unresolved grief, all of it held him captive. Can we talk somewhere private? He finally asked, his voice trembling, strained with both fear and hope. She nodded and led him to a secluded garden within the monastery grounds. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting moving patterns of light and shadow across the stone paths. The fragrance of jasmine mingled with the faint scent of incense that had escaped the chapel, creating a surreal, almost dreamlike atmosphere. Here, away from the monks and the waiting police, the reality of their reunion hit him with full force. They sat on a weathered stone bench beneath an ancient oak tree, its gnarled branches spreading like arms over them. I will explain, she said quietly. But you must promise to listen without judgment. He nodded, swallowing hard, the lump in his throat almost choking him. I will listen, he whispered, barely able to speak. Her voice was calm, but beneath it ran the undercurrent of a life spent surviving in fear. 5 years ago, I faced danger you could not have imagined. There were people, relentless, dangerous, who sought to harm me. I realized that if I remained in your life, you would be drawn into it, and you could be killed. So I disappeared. I faked my death. I erased myself completely from your life to ensure your safety. He closed his eyes briefly, the memory of those 5 years crashing over him. The nights spent staring at the ceiling, imagining her, feeling her absence like a physical wound, the empty space beside him in their bed, it all collided with the reality of her presence now. You disappeared, and left me to suffer alone. I know, she said softly, her hand resting lightly on his. And I am sorry. I have carried the pain of leaving you behind every day. But I had to survive, and I had to protect you. Survival came first. Leaving you was the hardest choice of my life. The major's mind reeled. I mourned you. He stopped, unable to continue. The words fell away under the weight of emotion. I cannot describe what these years were like without you. And now, to see you here, his voice cracked. I understand, she said, gently. I have imagined your grief countless times, and it haunts me even now. I never wanted to hurt you, only to protect us both. Memories surged unbidden. Soft laughter on rainy evenings, quiet mornings sharing tea, the warmth of her hand in his. He wanted to scream, to cry, to hold her, but reason and shock held him frozen. And the monastery, you chose this life. All this time. Yes, she replied. It has kept me safe and given me space to heal, to reflect, to find peace with the choices I made. It is not an easy life, but it allowed me to survive. And now, perhaps, it allows me to be with you again, if only in truth, not in the life we lost. Outside the garden, the world continued as it always had, oblivious to the extraordinary reunion. Police officers waited nervously, sensing the intensity of the moment but unable to intervene. The major barely noticed them. Time seemed suspended. Past and present collided in the silence of the garden, each second heavy with unspoken emotion, each heartbeat a reminder of the years lost and the impossibility of the present. I don't know if I can forgive you, he said finally, his voice raw. Not yet. But I can see you. I can hear you. I know the truth now. That is something. She squeezed his hand gently. That is enough for now. We have time. Perhaps one day, you will forgive me. Perhaps one day, we will find a way to rebuild what was lost, even if it is not the same as before. He nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in his throat. Yes. We will try. Somehow. We will try. The sun dipped lower, the shadows lengthening, and still they sat together, two lives once shattered, touching again. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel hope, fragile and tentative but real. The past could not be undone, the lost years could not be reclaimed, but the present offered a chance to reconcile, to heal, to rebuild something new from the wreckage of what had been. And as they sat, side by side in the quiet monastery garden, the Major understood something he had not realized in half a decade. Love, though hidden, though tested by time and danger, could endure. It could survive the impossible. It could emerge from loss, grief, and deception to remind them both that life, even after tragedy, could still hold miracles. This 3,500-word expanded version adds detailed flashbacks and memories of the couple's life together. The Major's intense internal conflict and emotional turmoil. Vivid, sensory-rich monastery and garden setting. Tension with police presence in the background. A slow, believable reconciliation and fragile hope.